Let's get the latest now on the fallout from Donald Trump's tariffs on Australian beef. Joining me is MacroBusiness Chief Economist Leith van Onselen. Leith, good to catch up. Thank you so much for joining me. I want to start with the wipeout on Wall Street, $3 trillion gone after that announcement by Donald Trump. Is our market here also being impacted, and will this have longer-term impacts?
Oh, absolutely, Danica. Whenever there's correction in global markets, there's usually a correction in Australia as well, and this time is absolutely no different. So the ASX 200 fell nearly 1% yesterday, and today it's fallen by more than 2%. So we might be an island continent, but our financial markets are globally linked. So when overseas sneezes, we tend to catch a cold.
And there are now fears of a global recession because of this announcement. Do you see that eventuating?
Yeah, look. I'll say from the outset, we are in uncharted territory, so none of us really know how this is going to play out. But the chances of a global recession have certainly increased, and AMP Chief Economist Shane Oliver today raised the probability of a US recession to 40%, and he also believes that global growth is going to slow to around 2% from 3% currently. However, a lot of this is going to depend on how other countries retaliate. But one thing's for sure, Danica, uncertainty has increased and confidence has been hit. And if there's one thing we know, financial markets hate uncertainty.
Yeah, that's a good point. Look, I said earlier in the show, I mean, we can't be surprised by this. We knew Liberation Day was coming. We can't be shocked. Donald Trump is pushing forward with this America First agenda. But in terms of the tariff imposed on Australian beef, we don't trade a lot with the US to start with. So how big of a direct impact do you actually think this will have?
Yeah, so the direct impacts are going to be pretty small. So only about 4% of Australia's exports are to the US. So obviously a 10% tariff isn't going to hurt us too much. But the thing we have to worry about is the indirect impacts, so the impacts on the global economy, trading partners, those sorts of things.
Well, that was going to be my next question, because it's been imposed on, China or India, for example. Are you saying then that this could have a flow-on effect here, and what would that look like?
Oh, absolutely. So by way of comparison, Australia exports nearly 6 times as much to China as we do to the US. And Australia's top 3 export markets are China, Japan and Korea. And each of those countries are facing new tariffs ranging from about 24% to 34%. So if these US tariffs slow growth in these nations, our main trading partners, they'll likely buy fewer Australian goods. So we're talking, less iron ore purchases, less coal, less energy, that sort of thing. And that's sort of where the rubber really hits the road for Australia. It's the indirect impacts on the overall global economy, and it's also on our trading partners buying less of Australia's stuff. I will say, though, Danica, there is one upside, and that's that the Reserve Bank's more likely to cut interest rates harder because of these tariffs, and that's for 2 reasons. So first of all, we're likely to see slower global growth for the reasons just mentioned above. But also Australia is more likely to be dumped with cheaper goods, say from China, and that should help to lower imported inflation. So that is one, I guess, silver lining if you're looking for a rate cut.
Oh, well, there you go. And I'm sure there's many mortgage holders hoping for that at the moment, Leith. Look, I want to talk to you about housing. Look, housing affordability is at its worst level in more than 2 decades. We know rents are up. Building approvals are at 20-year lows. And we know that Albo had this big, bold plan to build 1.2 million new homes by 2029. But according to the ABS's new dwelling approvals data, 15,400 homes were approved for construction in February. That's about 23% below target. Leith, we've got rampant migration. We aren't building enough homes. Where are we going to put all these people? You've crunched the housing data figures. Just how far behind is Labor on its target?
Oh, we're massively behind. So that housing accord says that we're going to build 20,000 homes per month for 5 consecutive years. And over the first 8 months of the housing accord, because it commenced in 1 July last year, only 123,800 dwellings have been approved construction, and that's below the target of 160,000. So we're 23% below in the first 8 months. And it's also important to note that merely approving a home for construction doesn't mean that it actually gets built. And over the history of the ABS's data, dwelling completions have lagged approvals by about 6%. So we never actually build as much housing as has been approved. And as a result, Australia's rate of housing construction is lagging even further behind the target, if you base it on that. And really, when it gets down to it, the only solution to the housing shortage is to bring demand back into line with supply, and that's by cutting immigration. And the latest federal budget forecast that Australia's population is going to grow by 1.8 million people in the next 5 years, and 1.4 million of those are going to be in the major 3 East Coast markets. We're talking New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland. And the latest population statement that was released in December said they're going to add 13.5 million people in the next 40 years. Now, that's the same as adding another Sydney, another Melbourne, and another Brisbane to Australia's existing population. So we can't possibly hope to solve the housing shortage by importing hundreds of thousands of extra people every year and growing Australia's population by 50% in just 40 years. That's an equation that just does not add up. And the solution to this housing crisis is to bring demand down by cutting immigration hard.
Absolutely. I mean, we're already in reckless territory, but when you hear population figures like that, it should worry everyone because we're not ready for it, and we certainly don't have the infrastructure available right now. But, look, hopefully this debate in the next couple of weeks fires up on migration. It's an important one to have. Leith van Onselen, always nice to speak with you. Thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Danica.